Hello, my friend. Where are you listening from tonight? Is it raining where you are, or are the stars keeping watch above you? Wherever you are, let this story be your harbor. Let the sea grow quiet inside you. Tonight, we sail back through time, to the glowing shores of ancient Carthage, where the air once smelled of salt and cedar, and a queen named Dido built a city from exile and flame. Her voice will guide us, through love and loss, through storm and silence, through the rise of empires and the soft survival of memory. So, close your eyes now, slow your breathing. Let the sound of the waves carry your thoughts away from the world of ours and into the timeless. This is the story of Dido, the queen of fire and sea. I remember a city that rose out of the water like a hymn the sea could not stop singing. We called it Tyre, an island cradled by harbors, where dawn unfastened itself along the masts and dusk folded away the sails. The first sound of my childhood was not a cradle song but the hush of foam stroking stone. The first scent, not milk, but brine, cedar, and crushed violets warmed in the sun. Our palace climbed the island's height in terraces of pomegranate and date, its courtyards veiled by lattices of carved cedar that held the light the way a hand holds water. In the mornings, the marble floors were cool as moonlight. By noon, they remembered the sun. I was Elissa then, daughter of King Belus, small enough to hide behind a pillar and large enough to believe that every ship in the harbor sailed only for me. Two harbors cupped our lives like open palms. To the north, boats stitched the tide with their slow needles. To the south, heavier vessels slept with their bellies full of grain and wine, copper and glass. Beeswax and linen dyed the color of dawn's last secret. Sailors called to each other in braids of languages. Phoenician, Greek, the desert's hard speech. Knots they tied with their throats and teeth. The smell of pitch clung to their hands. The smell of far places clung to their clothes. At sunrise, the temple bells lifted the day out of darkness. Priests of Melkart opened the bronze doors, and the first light entered like a king that needed no crown. I would press my fingers to the threshold's cool edge and listen to the sound of sandals and prayer. Soft, measured, almost the same sound. The altars smoked with myrrh and pine. The smoke climbed, patient as ivy, until it wore the ceiling like a borrowed sky. My father taught me to read silence before he taught me to read law. He said a queen must hear the sentence inside a pause, the bargain inside a smile. He stood with me on the terrace at dusk, robe breathing with the wind, and said, "The sea has a son and a daughter. The son is trade, he counts, the daughter is dream, she returns. You must be both, Elissa, or you will be neither." I tried to be obedient to both tides, though some nights I fell asleep with salt on my lips, and some mornings I woke with numbers on my tongue. Anna, my sister, was laughter-given bones and bracelets. She ran faster than propriety, learned faster than patience, and always carried a stash of figs for bribing the stable boys into letting her ride before lessons. She teased me for watching the horizon. "Speak to it if you must," she said, "but do not marry it." "I will only borrow it," I answered. And she threw her head back and laughed a sound that sent the doves slanting from the balustrade. I learned how a city keeps its sleep. The watchman's staff tapping the hours along the wall, the late oars that fold into the wharf like tired wings, the tavern door that shuts with a sigh, the last brazier going dim in the dye quarter. I also learned how a city keeps its shame, whispers sliding under doors, names tucked inside cups, the weight of unsaid things that turns ceilings heavy. My tutors called these studies history and politics. I called them listening. Sometimes my father took me to the workshops of purple, where the ocean gave us a color it hid from other eyes. Women with forearms strong as oars cracked the murex shells, their thumbs stained with the slow alchemy of patience. Vats frothed and breathed, a living bruise shifting from green to blue to a purple so deep the night envied it. Cloth went in as prayer and came out as oath. Later, when I wore that color, I felt not pride but responsibility, as if the sea had signed its name on me. On festival days for Tanit and Baal Hamon, the city braided itself with laurel and myrtle. Children ran with little lamps cupped in both hands. The elders salted the thresholds and spoke blessings that tasted of smoke and honey. Musicians tuned their pipes until the air hummed. Drums marked the long heartbeat that pulled the island through dusk into night. Vendors shouted the old words for sweet and warm and now. Fishmongers lifted scales to catch the sunset, turning every silver skin into a mirror with a brief, holy light. I learned the geometry of ships, how a prow parts water like a truth you cannot unhear, how a keel remembers mountains because it used to be one, how rope speaks when it is wet and sings when it is dry. The pilots taught me the names of winds, the wind that lies, the wind that returns, the wind that argues with cliffs, and the wind that forgives them. Stars, too, had their negotiations. We measured them with a reed and a squint, then trusted them with our lives. The palace had rooms that were never empty, only waiting. In one, the scribes held debate with ink. In another, old soldiers taught young boys how to stand without fear and how to lower their eyes without losing their minds. My mother's garden kept a separate calendar. Pomegranate first, then fig, then almond, with midnights that smelled of jasmine and roasted sesame. If I could not sleep, I walked there barefoot, collecting the night's coolness through the soles of my feet until my thoughts learned to lie down. When I first saw Sychaeus, he was dividing offerings at the temple treasury with fingers that seemed to count and bless at once. He did not glance up the way men do when they wish to be seen. He noticed me the way mornings notice windows, without announcement, entirely. When he spoke to my father, his voice had the measured kindness of someone setting a vessel onto a table that has already known too much loss. He smelled of cedar dust and ink, of iron cooled correctly. If some loves are thunderbolts, ours was rain. It began everywhere at once and asked for nothing but time. We walked the roof paths at dusk, where figs cast round shadows and swallows stitched the air with thread only they could see. He taught me a map I had not known I needed, the way men keep count of hope when they cannot keep count of coin, the way a priest makes room inside a prayer for the doubt that still loves God, the way a marriage can be a harbor without a wall. He did not say, "I will save you." He said, "Let us share the keeping." And my heart, which had already learned to carry itself, agreed to rest some of its weight in his hands. Tyre prospered in those years, the way orchards prosper, with shade and story. Caravans brought lapis that stole dusk from mountains, cinnamon curled like sleeping serpents, glass that caught the sun and would not let it go. We traded with islands whose names tasted like oil on the tongue and with coasts whose names were a thirst you could drink. Our ledgers thickened like winter blankets. So did our generosity. Widows received measures of grain that did not dwindle. Children of sailors lost to storms played games in the courtyards of men who owned too much. And the poor could enter the temple in garments borrowed from the gods. But prosperity does not silence envy. It feeds it. Pygmalion, my brother, grew into a crown the way a knife grows into a hand. At first he was only restless, then merely exacting, then pleased by the sound obedience makes. He learned the grammar of fear quickly and spoke it without accent. A glance that says you may be next, a pause that says you will not be warned. When he looked at Sychaeus, I felt the temperature of rooms change. Before the storm arrived, the days wore a kind of forgivable perfection. I kept my lessons. I sat in council and learned the mathematics of mercy. I visited the dyers and learned the patience of seas. I watched the harbor and learned the humility of distances. At night, Anna and I braided each other's hair and traded futures like bracelets. "Will you ever leave this island?" she asked. "Only in stories," I said. "Then tell me one," she demanded. And I did. A story in which everything we loved remained. The city's music had movements. Morning clatter, noon barter, evening blessing, midnight hush. Even hush has instruments. The breath of olive leaves, the pulse of a fountain's throat, a fish jumping once and regretfully, the soft thud of figs yielding to ripeness on the ground. I drank it until I could hear when a lie entered the harmony. The first time I heard it, I was standing in the audience hall. The floor cool under my soles, the lamps wearing their little walls of gold. A messenger finished bowing too quickly. My father did not correct him. We all understood without speaking. Something had changed its mind about us. Zacchaeus tightened the temple accounts as a mother tightens a child's cloak in wind. He audited without shame and forgave without advertisement. When I asked, "What do numbers say about the soul?" he smiled. "They say what we tell them to say until the day we ask them to tell the truth." He kissed my forehead where thought begins and said no more. On market days, I walked among the stalls with a thin veil that deceived no one. A woman sold combs carved from bone that once carried mountain wind. A potter shaped a drinking cup that knew before he did which lips would love it. A boy tried to sell me a turtle as if it were a jewel. I bought his earnestness and set the turtle back in a basin where it could consider its options. Horses stamped at the edge of the square, the dust around their hooves becoming its own weather. I smelled olive oil, dates, salted fish, roasted chickpeas, and a thread of smoke that reminded me of winter and weddings. An old singer plucked a lyre, and his voice made the air a soft net we all fell willingly into. In the scribe's hall, law lived on reed and clay. I learned to speak it as gently as truth allows. Contracts were not weapons, but promises that knew their own weight. Where men argued, I asked for water and time. Thirst and hurry are the two worst counselors. When a widow came to me with a debt her husband had left, I declared the debt a guest that had overstayed, gave it bread, and sent it away. The hall breathed easier afterward. In the training yard, boys practiced with spears dull enough to spare pride, but sharp enough to teach. Their laughter had a pitched edge that made mothers glance up from their weaving. I asked the captain what courage was. He said, "Staying where you said you would when the wind remembers your name." At night, I dreamt of wind learning my name and woke with a taste of iron I could not explain. Our inner rooms kept smaller histories. A bead from a necklace that broke at a wedding. A seal ring that fit no one because its owner had gone to sea and become rumor. A strand of hair in a tiny jar. Anna swore it belonged to the most beautiful woman Tyre ever forgot. We had cupboards for light, polished bronze dishes catching windows, heaped linens reflecting dusk, alabaster jars that did not hide what they held because fragrance needs witnesses. If you ask what peace looks like, I will tell you. It looks like the way a nurse arranges a sleeping child's fingers so they will not wake prickling. Like the way a baker wipes the lip of the jar before the next hand dips. Like the way a queen turns her head to listen to a servant's hesitation instead of her words. Peace is not an absence. It is a choreography. And yet, beneath choreography, the floorboard spoke. A board that had never creaked began to answer footsteps. A servant who had never stumbled began to stumble on the same syllable. My husband's name. I heard coin counted with a rhythm that suggested breath held too long. I smelled distrust, which smells of copper and vinegar. Anna noticed my frown and pressed a fig into my palm. Eat, she said. Thinking is hungry work. I ate and did not stop thinking. Sychaeus and I took to walking later, between the last bell of the temple and the first lamp of the harbor. We stood where the breeze from the north and the south met and shook hands. He traced the constellations for me with a finger that might as well have been a god's reed. There, he said, is the road for ships that cannot afford to be seen. There's the road for prayers that cannot afford to be refused. Every map is a confession. What does ours confess? I asked. That we believe in return, he said. I had begun to keep a ledger of scents. First rain on dust, old cedar opening itself to heat, wool dried too close to fire. Lilies near the fishmongers, because even lilies learn steel. Anna's hair after she ran on the shore and brought back the ocean in strands. When I say I can smell a storm, I do not mean weather. I mean the hour a life realizes its season has changed. One evening a foreign envoy arrived with earrings heavy as law. He bowed to my brother too deeply and to my father not enough. He looked at me invisibly, which is a way of seeing I do not forgive. He left with a gift his ship could not carry. My father said nothing, but his hand on mine miscounted the quiet between us by one heartbeat. The night before the knife, Tyre was perfect with cruelty. The harbor breathed a tame breath. The lamps along the quays made honey on the water. The bell at the temple answered the moon with a note that said, "Stay." Anna fell asleep on my couch with ink on her thumb from tracing a new border on an old map. I stood at the window and smelled iron where there should have been fig. Peace does not end with thunder. It ends when a familiar step chooses a different weight. I kissed Sychaeus' brow as he left for the treasury. Nothing unusual, everything already different. He said, "Do not wait up." I said, "I will not," and waited anyway. When he did not return at the ordinary hour, I blew out the lamp and listened to the dark. What follows is told elsewhere. The quickness of the act, the softness of the servant's breath after, the floor learning a new color badly. I will not give the night more body than it already had. But I will say this, a city knows when a clean hand has been cut from it. Tyre shivered. The sea struck the wall 3 times with the flat of its palm and did not apologize. Grief made my rooms different sizes. Some doors grew too narrow for my ribs, some windows enlarged until they were entirely sky. People brought me food that tasted like names I could not say. Anna combed my hair and broke the comb and wept as if she had injured my skull. The priests spoke. The smoke spoke louder. When his spirit came to me, he did not frighten the dog sleeping by my couch. He stood at the edge of the room like a memory that had practiced until it became miracle. The sea was in his voice. He said there was gold hidden where no hand would look, enough to buy sails and silence. He said dawn is a door that opens whether you stand there or not. He said go. Behind his words, I heard the dull consent of the gods, like old men nodding because law requires it. I woke with salt on my lips and a decision wearing my body. Anna, I whispered. She sat up as if pulled by a string threaded through my heart and hers. We leave, I said, before the city remembers how to call me sister. She did not argue. She went to the chest where children keep their shells and kings keep their crowns and took out only what a life can carry: bread, oil, the small bronze idol that smells like 1,000 mornings. We told almost no one, and told everyone who needed the telling. Pilots who could read a star through cloud, carpenters whose hands were weather's cousins, mothers who had already taught their babies to be quiet when a door thinks. I walked once more through the palace, cheek to familiar wall, palm to familiar column, and felt the building exhale, relieved to return to its first occupation, which is stone. We met the harbor not with farewell, but with departure. Farewell begs, departure decides. The lamps along the quay did a small trembling thing and then recovered themselves. I looked back without looking back. The island shifted slightly, like a woman adjusting her shawl, and I understood I had been wearing Tyre and would never wear it again. Before dawn unbuttoned the sky, we slid into water that knew us by the weight of our fear. Oars dipped, a first sentence written on a page the gods held open. The city of violets and salt stood behind us, a beauty I had to let become distance so it could become story. And the story, which had been living its life inside me, stepped forward and began to breathe with its own mouth. The city did not collapse. It adjusted. That is how knives speak, quietly, in revisions. A corridor that had always smelled of oil lamps now smelled of something colder. A guard I knew by his humming learned a new song. Silence. We do not notice the language of harm until it conjugates us. After Sychaeus fell, Tyre continued to shine, because beauty is the world's most obedient lie. The harbor kept its mirror, the markets kept their noise, the temple kept its bells. Only the hours forgot how to hold me. I slept in fragments, woke in fragments, ate because hands placed bread where my mouth might remember it. Grief narrowed the present until it became a hallway with no doors. Then he came, not to call me back, but to deliver me forward. No wind moved, yet the curtains lifted as though a cautious hand had tried the room. He stood where the floor keeps the weight of every step it has loved. Elissa, he said, and the name remembered how to belong to me. He told me of gold, yes, hard mercy stored in earth. But more than that, he told me of leaving as if it were a sacrament. Before dawn learns you, he said. He placed the sentence in my chest like a lamp lit from within. When I woke, the dark had become simple. I crossed the cold tiles, found Anna already sitting upright, her hair a black question mark against the pillow. Do we run? She asked. We sail, I said. We began the choreography of departure, the quiet ballet of those who cannot afford farewells. Scribes who had learned to write like rain now wrote like footsteps. Fast, light, leaving. Carpenters shaped planks by lamplight. The scent of fresh cedar rose like prayer. Women stitched sails the color of dusk, so the sky would confess us as its own. We packed what saints of exile pack. Seed for fields not yet found, oil for lamps we might never own. Small idols that remember the shape of dawn even in the pockets of night. In a hidden court a steward lifted from a jar the coin Sychaeus had redeemed from the world, not greed, but guarantee, not wealth, but wings. Gold is a slow boat. That night it learned to fly in sacks over shoulders. Anna knotted the cords with fingers that shook only once. "Eat," she said, pressing a date into my palm. The fruit tasted of suns I had not yet seen. Rumor travels faster than ships. We outran it by speaking to no one we did not need to love. Pilots with the stars printed behind their eyes came to us with oiled oars and listening hands. Mothers wore their infants close. Fathers wore their fear inward, where it could not startle the lamps. Old men who remembered storms remembered to bless the planks. A girl tucked a clay whistle into her sleeve, as if the night might need a bird. The harbor slept in the curve of the island like a child that trusts the bed. We moved through it as breath moves through a mouth that has learned to keep secrets. Torches along the quay trembled, either from wind or from the conscience of fire. The sea lay slick and black as polished basalt, undecided whether to keep us or confess us. "Now," the pilot murmured. Ropes loosened, knots forgot their vows, and the ships drifted, first like thoughts, then like decisions. I looked back once. The palace windows were perfectly dark, a grid of refusals. Pygmalion City held its face like a coin, heads or tails, it would buy the same sorrow. I put that sight into the pocket where queens keep their useless sentences and turned to the bull. Dawn unbuttoned the sky, one pearl at a time. Oars feathered the water, a flock learning a single wing. We made no sound large enough for the gods to notice, and so the gods, being large, did not. Behind us Tyre diminished from name to light to rumor, and I felt my life lengthen in front of me like a road that imagines its own travelers. Days at sea do not pass. They accumulate. We ate bread made of yesterday and decision. We drank thin wine lifted to lips that could not afford thirst. In the afternoons, the sun lay on us like a cat, opinionated and warm. At night, the sky opened its 1,000 unblinking eyelids. I learned to listen to the difference between wave and wake, wind and wish. A queen who has lost a city will learn any grammar that promises return. We marked our course by birds and the behavior of the moon. When gulls flew lower than habit, rain arrived politely. When the moon wore a broken bowl, the wind remembered our names and shook us for joy. A boy counted the waves from sunrise to sleep. He never finished, and in this he was truer than our maps. Once, far to the west, the water went the color of hammered copper. Fish rose with the light on their backs and turned the sea into a bowl of coins. An old woman laughed and said the ocean wanted to pay us for our trouble. "Keep your sorrow," I told it under my breath. "We will take your road." A storm came that tried to teach us humility and learned instead our stubbornness. The sail thundered, the mast prayed with both arms. The hull spoke in groans that were not fear but effort. We tied ourselves to what we trusted, each other mostly, and sang until the rain forgot it was a knife. When morning arrived, it arrived everywhere at once, as if the world had been waiting to exhale. We gathered rainwater from the dips of the deck and drank it like a new law. Then the smell of land, green and animal, warm as bread, new as a name. The shore curved ahead like a listening ear. We anchored in a cove sown with reeds and light, and the sand, when I stepped upon it, sighed. I have never trusted ground more than I trusted that sigh. We met the people who lived just beyond the hills with gifts that explained us. Silver looped with patience, cakes that remembered Aeneas, wine that forgot pride. They measured our hunger without humiliating it. Land? Their chief asked, amused as a man with more milk than mouths. Only as much as an ox-hide can encircle, I said. His laughter rolled down the slope like loose stones. Take your circle, sea queen, he granted. We took the hide to the hill and taught it a lesson in infinity. Cut into ribbons thin as vows, knotted end to end, it walked the crest until our breath came sweet and our arms were shaking with triumph. Within that line we placed a city that had not yet admitted itself. We named the hill Byrsa, the hide, and the land accepted the name the way a body accepts a new scar. Shyly, permanently. Thus ended the grammar of knives. Thus began the grammar of hammers, looms, and laws. The first sound our city made was water attending its own future. We dug where the ground cupped coolness. When the spade struck the vein, the well rose singing. People cheered and put their mouths to the rope-dark bucket. And the water, sweet with the secret of stone, told us we were welcome. We began with shelters clever enough to follow the wind. Reed and clay, their walls braided with sunlight, their roofs thatched to shed temper and collect mercy. Fires learned our names. Bread remembered the shape of hunger and filled it. Children carried stones the size of their certainty. Men carried beams that still smelled like forest. Women carried the continuity of everything. I kept counsel on the slope of Byrsa, marking with my staff the imagined streets that would one day exist in stone. Leave the wind a way through, I said, tracing a corridor of air from hills to harbor. Put the dye workshops downwind of the market. Beauty has perfumes not all are ready to love. Curve the streets, I added, so strangers must slow to learn us. The city nodded inside its dust. We raised cisterns that breathed cool under noon, roofed them with cedar so the water would dream in the scent of ships. We laid keys like outstretched hands, each finger a promise to a direction. Ropes found their old songs. Bronze rings learned to shine like patient coins. Fishermen's shacks sprouted beside the measuring house. And the clerks there learned to smile the way scales smile when they are not asked to lie. Trades nested into one another. Carpenters spoke in dovetails and dowels. Potters taught earth the curve of thirst. Weavers imposed on air a pattern it forgave with pleasure. Soon the vats of Tyrian purple steamed again, paradoxic fragrance of ocean labor. And cloths rose dripping into sunset like banners of coaxed twilight. Children ran with stained fingers, proof that the sea had remembered our address. At dusk, I walked among the half-made doors and greeted each threshold by name. A door is a proposition. Enter, but be changed. Some stood already painted in ochre and smoke blue. Some waited undressed, polite in their roughness. I paused where a street would someday open into a square and told the empty to practice being full. It did, by collecting echoes. We drew law slowly, like a bow that should not snap. Weights true, measures steady, water shared, a levee small enough to be forgotten by the poor and remembered by the rich. Sanctuary promised to any ship whose flag had been stolen by a storm. For disputes, we built a court with benches curved like listening, and above it a frieze of waves to remind judges that every verdict returns to shore eventually. Our temples rose, first a shrine of stone and reeds to Melkart, then a clean, bright space for Tanit, whose hands are crescent and whose gaze is milk. We burned cedar and myrrh. We asked for nothing we had not already begun to give. When the sin shifted, the smoke moved through the streets, as if blessing each unpainted lintel with patience. We made festivals to persuade time we respected it. On the night of new lamps, every household lit a fresh wick and placed it in a window. The city became a constellation that believed in itself. On the feast of first salt, the fishmongers threw garlands on the pier, and the youngest child of the harbor master tossed crumbs to the gulls and called them brothers with such seriousness that even the birds grew solemn. Traders arrived the way news does, suddenly then, all at once. They came with tin and lead from the west, with gold dust sifted like stories from the south, with ivory that still remembered forests, with amber that smelled faintly of suns it had swallowed. We kept faith with the bargain of hospitality. A clean berth, fair measure, a story in return for a story. Your city is a mirror, a captain told me. It makes men examine their own faces. I thanked him, and then, privately, thanked the carpenters who had embedded honesty into the angle of our scales. Music studied our streets and decided to stay. Flutes practiced where the wind turned corners politely. Drums discovered the courtyard with the best echo. A girl with a voice like cool metal melted crowds in the late market until the fish sold themselves. At night, the city's hum softened into a cradle song amplified by water. Some slept. Enough did not that no one felt alone. Our languages blended without asking permission. The locals' vowels, round and generous, learned to share a bowl with our quick Phoenician consonants. Marriages followed. A market woman taught my steward to swear convincingly at donkeys. In exchange, he taught her to argue interest rates without raising her voice. Diplomacy always begins with a joke both can afford. I sat with counselors who smelled of sawdust and law. Betung, whose hands had memorized every plank in Carthage, said, "We need allies westward." Hanno, whose eyes were thin as horizon, said, "We need a second harbor. Storms are jealous. Let them choose which to ruin." Anna said, "We need more songs at supper. People trust what they can hum." I said, "We need patience, the coin that buys all others." Some nights I climbed the scaffolds and let the wind speak through them like a many-voiced flute. From there, the city became an instrument the sea played. Masts ticked, ropes thrummed, shutters clapped in polite applause. I closed my eyes and counted the heartbeats hiding in that sound. Beating in cradles, beating in the wrists of women carding wool, beating in men who dreamed of quarries becoming colonnades. A city is, before anything, a treaty between breathing. We shaped the harbor into a curve, so gentle even regret might rest there. Breakwaters reached their stone arms toward one another and stopped short, leaving a mouth where ships could speak without shouting. We marked depths with patient poles. We trained the channel to remember our attention. When the first convoy entered under a sky spilled with copper, even the fish changed their route to watch. I kept a ledger of mercies, a widow's debt forgiven and paid forward in bread, a boy's theft corrected with a job and a stool by the scribe, a ship spared by the harbor pilots who had memorized a sandbar's bad habits. Mercies are interest the gods collect later in praise. We paid on time. In the die quarter, purple returned to our hands. But not alone. Blue like cooled lightning, green like figs opening their throats to morning, and a red that made pomegranates jealous. Carthage learned its colors the way children do, by wearing them to sleep. Fabrics hung like private sunsets from beams between houses, and the alleys became rivers of cloth drifting toward market. The school we built taught not only letters but weights, winds, and the ethics of threshold. "Stand aside," the teacher told the boys, "for the one who carries more than you." "And how will we know who carries more?" asked a bright mouth. "You will feel it," she said. "That is called being a citizen." My nights were not empty. I woke sometimes to the sea moving the room an inch to either side, though the room did not move. In the basin beside my bed floated sprigs of myrtle. Their scent was the punctuation of calm. I spoke to Sychaeus then, not to beg, not to explain, but to report. "We have wells," I told him. "The water tastes like what I promised." "We have laws," I added. "They fit the humblest first. If the dead answer, they do so in the grammar of steadiness." My hands were steadier in the mornings. Word of our harbor spread on the backs of gulls and the mouths of men who could not help praising what made their work easier. Captains came with charts that looked like anxieties and left with charts that looked like songs. We stamped our seals, waves, and palms on contracts that did not leak trust. "Carthage," someone wrote on a slip of bark, "is a promise that kept itself." The slip turned up in a jar of dates 10 months later. I kept it because prophecy should be stored where sweetness gathers. And then, on a day when the air wore its gentlest blue and the city's laughter lay warm on its own lap, the horizon folded. Cloud rose green-black like a bruise, healing in reverse. The wind rehearsed its teeth. Fishermen hauled their nets and did not sing. Storm, I thought, but also arrival. Some destinies travel inside the weather. I stood on the terrace and felt the temperature of my life change by a degree only queens and sailors notice. "Beacons," I said, and the order ran through the streets like useful rain. Pitch staves lifted their orange tongues. Bells spoke with urgency, but not panic. In the distance, pale scraps of sail appeared and disappeared between sheets of rain. A ship struggled open-mouthed toward our harbor, ribs showing through its skin, like a story that had lost words but not meaning. He would come out of that storm, and love would come with him, and history, impatient, jealous, would come after. But for a breath longer, Carthage belonged only to itself. Its stones warm, its laws young, its harbor a hand extended not toward war or worship of names, but toward the simplest truth I know, that a city is a way of saying stay to those the sea would otherwise keep. And as the first thunder rolled across the roofs, I lifted my face to the salt and promised my people and the gods and the patient mouth of the harbor, we will keep. For many moons, the sea had been a friend that forgot its anger. It came and went like breath, laying its silver hands against the harbor walls, sighing through the ropes as if content to hum our city to sleep. Carthage had grown fat with peace. Ships came heavy with tin, wine, wool, and rumor. Children learned to name foreign spices by scent alone. The days folded neatly one into another, soft and golden, like freshly woven cloth. And then, as always, the gods remembered their taste for change. The first sign was sound. A single gull cried strangely, as if thrown from its own throat. The second was color. The horizon deepened from turquoise to green, from green to a bruised violet that no dye-master could claim. The air thickened, even speech grew heavy. The palm leaves whispered to each other in a dialect of warning. I was on the terrace of my upper palace, looking east toward the water, when the light broke its promise. A line of dark rose from the rim of the world, moving faster than thought. The sea, so recently tender, rolled its shoulders. A hush passed through the harbor, the hush before the orchestra lifts its bows. Men glanced up, saw what I saw, and ran. The wind arrived not as guest, but as conqueror. It tore banners from their poles, slapped the sea into froth, and filled every mouth with the taste of salt and omen. "Close the quays," I ordered. But the wind stole the words. The harbor master's signal flags whipped like wounded birds. In minutes, the rain came, sheets of silver knives. Lightning wrote its quick grammar on the clouds, erasing each line as it went. From my high place, I saw ships wrestled into chaos, their masts bending like knees in prayer. And far out, against the bruise of sky, a single vessel fought the storm's handwriting. Its sails were torn to ribbons, its hull flashed white between the waves. "Who would dare this sea?" Anna murmured at my side. "No one," I said, "unless the gods themselves steer him." Through that black sermon of wind and water, the ship limped closer. Our beacons, fed with pitch and courage, flared like eyes of defiance. I sent boats to meet it, though the oarsmen crossed themselves with every stroke. When at last the stranger reached the quay, its rope snatched by our men, a cry went up, half triumph, half disbelief. The ship sighed, a sound like gratitude and surrender, and settled against the stones. From it descended a company of exiles, men salt-pale and hollow-eyed, women carrying children swaddled in wet linen, old ones clutching tokens of vanished homes. And among them, one man walked with a gravity that steadied the chaos around him. He was tall, but not in the way of pride, more like a tree that has learned to lean with storms. His cloak hung heavy with rain. His face was carved by loss and purpose in equal measure. He looked at my city as a man might look at a shore seen once in prophecy. I went down to meet him. The wind tangled my hair, the torches sputtered, and for a moment the world held only the two of us. He bowed, not deeply, but as one sovereign to another. "Queen," he said, voice roughened by salt and thunder, "I am Aeneas, son of Anchises, once of Troy. We seek only a shore to mend our ships and our faith, and the name Troy rippled through my mind, like a legend suddenly awake. We had heard of that city across the sea, its beauty, its arrogance, its fall. Now one of its ghosts stood dripping before me. "Carthage welcomes those the sea has spared," I said. And the rain, hearing mercy spoken aloud, softened. We led them through torch-lit streets that shone like bronze veins under the downpour. Children peered from doorways. Dogs barked and then hushed, uncertain whether to fear or pity. In the great hall, we built fires in every brazier until the air glowed amber and thick with smoke. Steam lifted from their cloaks as if their bodies were leaving the storm by degrees. I ordered bread, figs, and wine. Simple comfort for mouths that remembered only salt. They ate slowly, reverently, as if tasting life again required instruction. Aeneas sat apart, the fire mirrored in his eyes. When Anna offered him wine, he thanked her in a voice gentler than his shoulders suggested. I asked quietly, "How long since Troy?" "Long enough," he said. The room fell still. Grief has its own gravity. We all leaned toward it. Later, when the guests had been given rest, I walked the empty corridors. The storm still prowled outside, clawing at the shutters, but within, the air was tender, as though the gods, having delivered their message, were resting too. I passed the room where Aeneas slept. Through the half-open door, I saw him seated on the floor beside a small bronze figurine, Venus, his mother perhaps, speaking to it in whispers, not prayer, confession. I left him to his privacy. For 3 days, the storm refused to end. The sky's color changed from slate to lead to the dim silver of exhaustion. Carthage wrapped itself in patience. Fires burned day and night. Aeneas's people mended sails, dried grain, sang old songs that bent toward hope. I visited often, bringing fruit and questions. Each time, he rose to greet me with eyes that seemed surprised by kindness. He spoke of Troy, of its towers that melted under fire, of the sea roads he had followed since. Crete, Sicily, the islands that would not have him. "I am searching for the land promised by the stars," he said, "a place where my gods may be reborn." "And when you find it?" I asked. He looked into the distance, though the walls were close. "Then I will build what was broken, and perhaps the wind will forgive us." His words found echo in the hollow places within me. We were both architects of ruins, each measuring the future with the ashes of what had been. When he smiled, rarely, it was the kind of smile that knows how fragile a moment is and cherishes it anyway. Anna noticed. That evening she said, "His presence has changed the air." "Yes," I answered. "The air breathes differently." When at last the clouds began to tear open, the sea lay still as a sheet of hammered tin. The sunset bled copper and rose into the waiting calm. I stood beside Aeneas on the palace terrace. "The gods are merciful," I said. "They saved you." He shook his head slowly. "The gods," he said, "save only what serves them. Perhaps we both do." We watched the light slip down the columns, the city gleaming clean and new as if baptized. Below us, Carthage exhaled, the sounds of hammers, the laughter of markets returning. Peace hummed its low note again, but the melody had changed. The sea was no longer background. It had become prophecy. That night, I dreamed of a ship sailing not away, but in circles, its sail filled by no wind, its deck empty but for a single flame that did not consume. When I woke, I could still smell rain and cedar, and something else, the faint perfume of a future not yet kind. The storm had unstitched itself from the sky, but its memory remained, the way a fragrance lingers after a guest departs. Morning opened carefully, a pale lid lifting from a silver eye. Over Carthage the light arrived as if listening first, tasting the rooftops with the gentlest gold, tracing the salt damp rails along the wharf, slipping through palm fronds like a rumor of forgiveness. The world smelled rinsed. Clay, fennel, crushed myrtle, wet rope. Even the gulls cried softly as if aware that noise might break the new glaze over our hours. "It is a day for the hills," Anna said, fastening the clasp of my riding cloak. "You have been a queen for too many days in a row, sister." "Go and be a body," I laughed and kissed her cheek. "Then let the wind keep my crown." Outside, The horses stamped and turned their bright eyes toward the east. Aeneas waited already in the yard below. No jewels, no titles, only leather and linen and the steadiness of a man who had taught his bones to travel. When our gazes met, the morning completed its rise. We rode with a small escort toward the high country, where the rain clouds like to gather and argue with the peaks. The path uncoiled between thorn and rosemary, the hooves ringing like small bells on stone. Behind us, the city glittered, young and earnest. Before us, the hills were a procession of sleeping beasts, their flanks furred with olive and pine. A river walked beside us a while, folding over rocks in phrases of silver. Every now and then, a hare burst from the grass like an idea changing its mind. For a long time, we did not speak. Silence has many flavors. This one tasted of clean air and unspent questions. When Aeneas finally broke it, his voice seemed to arrive from the same distance as the mountains. "In Crete," he said, "the bees swarmed our mast and would not be driven off. We thought the gods were pointing a finger. We built altars, we made vows. But the wind changed its grammar and drove us on. Sometimes I think the gods do not so much guide as witness. Witness has its own mercy," I said. "If no eye sees us, do we happen?" He glanced over, half smile, half sorrow. "To you," he said, "the world happens twice." We left the road and entered a grove where the trees grew tall and quiet. Their columns of bark fluted like old music. The air cooled. Somewhere ahead, goats wore bells like arguments, and a shepherd sang in a voice that made time walk slower. I dismounted to drink from a spring cupped in rock. The water was cold enough to teach my mouth another century. When I straightened, droplets clung to my lashes. The world bent and sharpened through them, each leaf a small bright truth. Clouds, thin as torn silk, had gathered above us. Beautiful, harmless. Then the wind changed its syllable. Leaves turned their pale undersides as if showing the sky their throats. Aeneas lifted his face, listened, and said only, "We should find shelter." Our guards ranged ahead, and within minutes one of them signaled, a cleft in the stone, half hidden by curtain ivy, dark as a promise. Inside, the air smelled of water thinking. The cave was shallow but kind, a lip of rock for sitting, a floor worn smooth by centuries of rainfoot. From the ceiling, thin threads of water fell with the patience of old women weaving. Outside, the first drops began, fat, spaced, prophetic. They quickened to a hush, then to a curtain, then to a drum line that stitched the forest to itself. Lightning blinked, blanched the world, and in its after white I saw Aeneas's face. Serious, attentive, almost young. He lit a small torch. The flame steadied, gold deciding to be brave. Its light crept along the walls and found carvings where ancient hands had told stone to remember. Deer with their limbs in mid-flight. A moon with teeth, a boat with too many oars, a woman standing between two lions, her hands lifted in a gesture I knew from old altars. "Whoever made these," I whispered, "believed that time eats only what it does not love." He answered with a nod that was almost a bawl. Rain filled the mouth of the cave with silver threads. Sound became a garment, woven of drops, lined with thunder, fastened with breath. Aeneas stood close enough that I could feel the weather of him. Salt, leather, a faint resin of shipwood. And beneath that, the unnameable scent that clings to those who have survived beyond their share. When he spoke, He chose the gentlest road through his own voice. In Sicily, he said, an old king gave us bread and a harbor, and asked for no story in return. I thought we might stop there forever. But at night the wind came, and called us by our secret names. It is difficult to refuse a god who knows your childhood. I watched a drop form at the lip of stone, fatten, and let go. The gods know many names for me, I said. Very few of them say woman. He turned then, fully, the torch making a geography of his face. Scars mapped into patience, the lines around the eyes that come not from laughter, but from looking long at horizons that do not answer. What name would you choose? He asked. Harbor, I said, surprising myself. Not wall, not crown. Harbor. The word made a soft room inside the cave. The rain deepened. Outside, the forest blurred into tenderness. Our guards, respectful of privacy and storm, remained a distance away, shapes among leaves. Aeneas leaned his spear against the wall and took off his cloak. Water rang from it with the bright music of metal. He placed the cloak over the stone lip like an altar cloth and gestured for me to sit. When I did, the cold of the rock surprised me into a small gasp. He looked concerned, then amused, then something more dangerous to a heart. Queens are made of weather, he said softly, but even weather chills. And wanderers, I answered, are made of roads. Even roads need rest, silence again, but a different species now. One that knows it is being watched by joy and does not flee. I studied his hands. Long, steady-fingered, knuckles scarred where history had argued. When he reached toward the torch to coax its wick, the shadows on the carved animals seemed to leap. Our two flames, one of pitch, one of blood, took each other's measure. Dido, he said, almost as if testing the weight of the name for the first time. I had not told him that name. To almost all, I was still Elissa. But names travel with wind, and the wind had been listening. Hearing that syllable in his mouth felt like walking into a room I had built in a dream, and finding it furnished with things I loved. Do you ever tire of strength? He asked. The question rang true and a little cruel, like a bell rung for medicine. Yes, I said, but strength is a guest who forgets to leave. When I ask it to go, it pretends not to hear. He smiled with his eyes more than his mouth. Then perhaps it needs a new sound to answer. His fingers grazed my wrist. Barely a touch, a rumor of touch. And the storm outside changed key. I felt the old engines within me quiet, as if a room of gears had agreed to rest. The cave smelled of wet stone, smoke, and the animal of our breath. I do not know if the gods watched. If they did, they learned something about mercy. When it came, the first kiss, it came like rain after a drought that has forgotten the grammar of water. Not hunger, not claim, recognition. The body remembers before the mind admits. I closed my eyes and found there a country without borders, a harbor without scan or tax, a bed laid for two exiles who had run out of synonyms for alone. His hands were careful the way craftsmen are careful with a material that will last generations. Outside, thunder made a long syllable, and then grew thoughtful. Time forgot to count us, and so we became impossible to measure. We spoke in fragments between silences that felt older than empires. Once, he murmured, I carried my father through fire. And I answered, carried a city out of light. Do you regret surviving? Only when I am not living, I said. He exhaled a laugh that made warmth without sound. Then live, he said. Rain softened from drum to whisper, as if the sky had exhausted its arguments. The torch guttered and steadied, the heart's cousin playing at mimicry. Drops fell from the rock in a rhythm that made me drowsy, a lullaby the cave must have learned from centuries of sleeping travelers. I rested my head against his shoulder and felt the tide of him. Shore, pull, return. The stone at our backs held us like a grandmother, stern, approving. When the rain finally thinned to threads, we stepped to the cave's lip. The forest steamed, leaves jeweled with beads of silver, trunks breathing, earth sweet as bread. Mist hung in the hollows like unfinished thoughts. A deer stood not far off, its coat darkened to velvet, its ears translating the world. It looked at us without fear and then leapt once, twice, and became a sentence the woods kept. We mounted. The horses, eager and theatrical, stamped and tossed their heads, wreathing the air with breath. We rode downhill slowly, letting the slick stones choose our pace. The river rejoined us and showed us what the sky had been doing to it. Froth at the bends, a new brightness in the pools, a confidence at the falls. Everything felt sharpened, as if the gods had washed the world and laid it out to dry. Neither of us spoke on the descent. Words would have been an argument with blessing. By the time the city came back into view, its walls honey-soft, its harbor cupped and shining, the day had folded itself into a golden accord. Carthage looked like a promise kept. In the lower fields, farmers straightened from their vines and waved with both hands. Children ran along the path, shouting questions and receiving smiles as answers. At the eastern gate, the guards lifted the bar and grinned like brothers who had chosen the right side by instinct. When we passed through the streets, the scent of cooking renewed its catechism. Coriander, lamb fat, sesame, baked figs. Women leaned from balconies to shake out rugs. Their bracelets made a bright rain of sound. An old man, blind and joyous, plucked a lyre and found a tune that had always been waiting. At the palace steps, Anna stood with the calm of someone holding two truths. Delight for me, caution for the world. Her eyes read my face the way scribes read omens in spacing and ink. She kissed my brow and whispered, "Be happy." I will keep watch in the shadow of her words, a tenderness settled that even history could not entirely steal. Night came down with the blue of gentians. Torches were lit along the colonnade, each flame taking its seat like a well-bred guest. From the harbor, a single bell sounded. Slow, content, nothing like alarm. Aeneas and his men ate in the lower hall. Laughter rose and fell like tide against pilings. I stood on the balcony above the garden and felt the sea breathe. Its voice had changed again, lower, slower, like a giant animal sleeping beside the house. He came to me there, not as hero or guest, but as the same man from the cave. Shoulders rinsed of thunder, eyes carrying the reflection of a flame that refused to harm. We spoke very little. Speech would have been a cup too small. "I have been many things," he said at last, "but rarely welcomed by the future. Then let this be the first place where tomorrow is kind." I answered. He bowed his head as if before an altar and said, "Dido?" The night made room for that syllable and kept it. When I slept, I dreamed of maps that showed no land, only currents, and of a harbor drawn in the shape of a hand. In the dream, I dipped my palm into the ink and lifted it to the sky, and the stars adhered like seeds. In the morning, those stars would look like omens to other people. To me, they looked like invitations. We did not know, how could we, that the guards, jealous of any human peace unlicensed by them, had already begun to rehearse their messenger. But for a little while longer, I owned my hours. I walked through the cool rooms of the palace with my sandals in my hand, so the floors could tell me their stories. I listened to the city learning its evening again after rain. I touched the cedar door frames and felt the sap's old lullaby. And when I returned to my balcony, the sea had spread out its long, dark silk and stitched the day to the night with a seam of silver. I stood at that seam and breathed with it. Long in, long out, until even the future, skulking beyond the horizon with its bag of instructions, grew drowsy and sat down. For once, the gods waited, and love, like rain remembering stone, found where to stay. The days that followed the storm were made of honey and salt. Each morning rose warm and untroubled, like a face freshly washed of grief. Carthage thrummed with renewal. Ships mended, trade revived, laughter returned to the markets as if it had merely been sleeping under the rain. The streets smelled of baked bread, jasmine, and tar. Children chased dogs through the courtyards of marble, and the fountains, always generous, sang again in their familiar dialect of falling water. And there was Aeneas. He moved among my people not as a guest, but as someone claimed by the city itself. The fishermen showed him their nets. He asked the names of every knot. The craftsmen sought his counsel on the strength of new hulls. In the evenings, he stood beside me as the lamps were lit along the harbor's curve. Each flame a promise that night would not go hungry. He told stories of Troy, not only of its burning, but of its laughter before the fire. How the walls smelled of cedar, how the river sang under the bridges, how the boys raced chariots through the alleys until the mothers scolded them with bread in their hands. His voice carried both ruin and reverence, and the listeners leaned close, not to pity, but to remember. Even the wind, gentle through the colonnade, seemed to pause for his memory. Anna said to me one night, while combing my hair before the mirror, "His grief shines, sister." "It attracts you, perhaps," I said, "but it is not grief I see in him. It is the courage to let grief breathe." She smiled faintly. "You speak as if courage were a kind of perfume." "Maybe it is," I said. "Invisible but known by those who need it." The days gathered like ripe fruit. I found myself walking through the city slower than before, as if each stone had acquired a pulse I did not wish to interrupt. When Aeneas joined me, the rhythm changed again. Our shadows touched before our hands did. He spoke little. His silences were full of thought. At the harbor, we would watch the waves pull and release, the eternal rehearsal of departure. Once he said, "The sea never stops loving the shore, though it leaves it every hour." I answered, "Then the shore must forgive easily." He smiled, but I saw the storm still hiding in the corners of his eyes. That year, the people asked for a festival, a celebration of peace, harvest, and return. We called it the Festival of Fire and Silence, for both had saved us. Fire that warms, silence that endures. The city prepared as if for marriage. Garlands of myrtle and rose draped the colonnades. The streets were strewn with saffron petals, and from every balcony hung silks dyed the color of sunset. At dawn, the bells of Tanit rang, a silver music that made the pigeons rise like scattered clouds. In the palace courtyard, Priests lit the sacred flame. It was small at first, a tremor of gold cupped between their palms. Then it climbed the air in perfect stillness. We offered oil, wine, and grain, symbols of the earth's patience. And the crowd bowed, murmuring prayers that melted into one great hum. When my turn came, I stepped forward in a robe of pale linen, my hair braided with threads of silver. Aeneas stood beside me, his tunic white, the mark of his lineage stitched at the hem. Our hands brushed as we both placed a handful of incense into the flame. Smoke rose between us, fragrant with myrrh and memory. The fire accepted it without question. After the rites, music took the streets. Drums throbbed like the city's heartbeat. Flutes wound their voices around the torches. The air was a tapestry of rhythm. Dancers moved barefoot across the stones, their feet kissing the dust that had built our walls. Children painted their faces with ash and laughter. In the harbor, ships glowed with lanterns strung from mast to mast, each reflection trembling upon the dark water like a second city. Born of light, I remember standing on the upper terrace, looking down upon it all. Carthage shimmered, alive beyond pride. It was more than I had ever dreamed when we cut that first oxhide on Bursa Hill. And beside me stood a man who understood the cost of building from ruin. For a moment, the world balanced perfectly. No debt, no threat, no waiting messenger from the gods. Only breath, shared between the living. When night deepened, the celebration softened. Music thinned to murmurs. The crowd dispersed to wine and rest. Aeneas and I remained on the terrace. Below us, the dying fires of the festival blinked like patient eyes. He spoke first. Your people love you with the kind of loyalty men usually reserve for home. It's rare to be both queen and comfort. I smiled. A city is a body, I said. It needs warmth to live. I only keep the hearth lit. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. And when the hearth burns too high? Then I trust the gods to know the limit, I said. The wind shifted. His cloak brushed my arm. The scent of smoke, wine, and sea mingled, a perfume that would follow me for years. Far below, the sea reflected the stars. One fell, streaking across the sky like a white whisper. Aeneas's gaze followed it. In my country, he said, we believe that when a star falls, a soul has found its road. Then may ours fall together, I answered before I could weigh the words. He looked at me long, as if hearing in that wish both promise and prophecy. Together, he said at last, the word a soft flame in the night. We stood that way for a while, two shadows held between sky and sea. The wind played through the torches, making them bow without extinguishing them. The moon leaned low, curious, and somewhere in the distance, thunder spoke again, too far to frighten, near enough to remind. Over the next days, Aeneas became not guest, but thread within the fabric of Carthage. He walked its markets, spoke with its priests, helped repair the ships of its fishermen. He taught the boys of the harbor how to mend sails in the Trojan way, and the older men how to read weather in the motion of birds. At council, his advice was calm and precise. Born of someone who has seen too many empires forget humility, the people adored him. Anna teased me, your queenhood has found a mirror. I only smiled, unwilling to admit how the mirror reflected more than politics. But joy is never left unguarded. On the 7th night after the festival, I dreamed again of fire. Not gentle fire, but the kind that eats its own smoke. In the dream, I walked through the streets of Carthage. The walls glowed red, but no heat touched me. At the city's heart stood a man with wings, silver and pitiless. He spoke no words, but the sound of his breath extinguished the torches. When I woke, the scent of burned myrrh clung to my hair. I found Aeneas already awake, standing by the window. "The wind changes tomorrow," he said quietly. I looked at him. "What wind?" "The one that calls my name," he answered. Outside, the dawn had not yet broken. The horizon was a dark edge, a blade between what we had and what we would lose. In that moment, I understood that the gods had indeed waited, only so the cutting could be clean. Still, I placed my hand over his heart. It beat beneath my palm like something trying to learn another rhythm. "Then let us not speak of leaving until it comes," I whispered. He closed his eyes, nodded once, and we both pretended that silence was still ours to keep. That day, Carthage woke bright again, unaware of the new storm being written in the air. The people sang. Children ran through the market with garlands in their hair. Life, obedient to itself, continued. Only I moved through it as one walking beneath a sky that has already chosen its color. I smiled, I ruled, I laughed when laughter was expected. But the sound had begun to fade before it left my mouth. And somewhere, beyond the reach of our harbor, the sea rehearsed the sound of departure. Dawn arrived without a sky. It came as a pale breath over the roofs, a gray taste in the mouth of morning. Carthage was awake yet unwilling. The harbor's ropes lay slack, the gulls refused their argument. Even the sea, that restless witness, kept still, as if holding its breath for what it already knew. Aeneas was gone, not vanished like smoke, but gone like a word withdrawn from the sentence it once made beautiful. I had risen early, expecting to hear the usual call of oars against the quays. Instead, there was only the hush of obedience, the silence cities wear when their queen is broken. Anna found me by the balcony. Her eyes were salt, her voice the kind that begs without knowing it. "Perhaps he will return," she said. I looked at the empty water and answered, "Men do not return to the things that make them human. The gods forbid it." That day I did not eat, but I built. I ordered a pyre raised upon the highest hill, the one where the wind has no master. We carried cedar, olive, and laurel branches, their fragrances braided like memories. My hands, unaccustomed to work since Tyre, bled a little from the splinters. The blood felt honest. We stacked the logs in careful layers, round upon round, until it looked less like wood and more like intention. Upon it, I laid his gifts: the cloak he had left folded at the foot of my bed, the sword he had sworn to protect with, and the small cup we had shared in the cave, still smelling faintly of smoke and rain. Each object was a confession, and together they spoke a language that even the gods must have understood. The people did not question me. They believed I built for ritual, for purification, for peace. They gathered below the hill as the light began to fade, torches in hand, faces lifted in solemn trust. To them, their queen was again a priestess. To me, I was only a woman making sense of silence. The sky that evening was gold-wounded by violet. A single gull circled above, its wings dipped in firelight, and the wind, my old ally, came up from the sea with a salt that tasted almost sweet. I wore a robe of white, bound with a narrow cord. Around my wrist gleamed one band of gold, my mother's. It was heavy, as memories are. When the pyre was finished, I told Anna to bring oil and myrrh. We poured them over the wood. The scent rose in waves, heavy and holy. "Will this free you?" she asked. "Nothing frees us," I said gently, "but beauty helps us forgive the chains." I sent her away before night came fully. There are doors one must close from the inside. Alone, I stood before what I had built. The city glowed beneath me, its 1,000 lamps flickering like a prayer with too many tongues. I could hear the faint murmur of life. Music from the lower streets, a child's laugh, a market door closing. The heartbeat of a world that would outlive me. For that, I was grateful. A queen should not demand eternity. It is enough to have made something that remembers how to breathe. The torches were waiting. I lifted one, its flame a living thing that leaned toward me as if recognizing its kin. "Come," I whispered, and set it to the wood. The fire hesitated only a moment, then answered with its own breath. It climbed swiftly, licking the oil, tasting the laurel, exhaling amber and shadow. Sparks lifted like migrating souls, scattering into the rising wind. The smell was not of death, but of release. Myrrh and cedar, smoke and salt, the incense of an ending that refused despair. Heat pressed close, wrapping me in its slow embrace. My robe clung to my skin. Light poured through the fabric until I seemed to wear the dawn. The wind's hills sang, low, wordless, vast. Somewhere below, I heard Anna cry my name once, twice, and then the crowd's collective gasp, a sound like a wave breaking against itself. But I did not turn. I looked upward, where the sky had opened to swallow color, and in that wide blue-black I saw the shape of a ship, his ship, a pale sail cut by distance, already too far to call. The smoke of my pyre reached toward it, not in vengeance, but in message. It would touch him somewhere on the deck, perhaps as a sudden warmth, perhaps as a whisper between stars. "Remember me," I murmured to the night. Not as fire, but as harbor. The flames grew higher, and the edges of the world softened. Sound became liquid, air became gold. I felt my pulse slow until it matched the rhythm of the sea below. For a moment I was no longer separate. Carthage, fire, wind, and queen, all breathing the same breath. And then, quiet, a kind of stillness that burns brighter than flame. The last thing I saw was the horizon, that fine line where sky and water confess their resemblance. It glowed, thin, eternal, and I stepped into it. I did not end. I changed my shape. The gods, startled by the courage of my choice, gave me a different kind of throne. They placed me in the air itself, between wind and wave, between longing and remembrance. Now I move unseen through the corridors of storm, guiding ships that bear widows, lovers, and fugitives. When their sails strain and the ropes sing, it is my breath that steadies them. Sometimes, on the calmest nights, the fishermen of Carthage still see a faint light hovering above the old hill. They call it the Queen's Flame, a ghost fire that neither spreads nor dies. They say it warms the air around it, that the wind bends kindly when it passes. That is me, Dido of Tyre, Dido of Carthage, daughter of the sea, mother of memory, the woman who loved what the gods could not. I am the echo inside their thunder. I am the stillness after. I did not fall. I was lifted, not into heaven of trumpets and laws, but into the soft geography between wind and remembering, where the world keeps the shapes it loves after they have finished being bodies. My first breath as not body was the sea itself, leaning its long shoulder under me. Its voice said, "Stay. I have kept everything you gave me. I will keep you too. From here, all distances are near." I look down, and Carthage is not stone, but pulse. A golden animal asleep with one eye open. Her harbor curves like a palm, still warm from holding another's hand. The streets wear their lamps like necklaces again. Music moves through the alleys with the confidence of someone who has already been forgiven. I know each threshold by the way it welcomes dust. I know each well by the laughter that echoes there, even when no one draws water. Anna lives beneath this sky for many years. I follow her along the balconies at dusk, when the lavender hour draws its shawl over the roofs. She speaks to me aloud, and no one is embarrassed. She pours a first cup of wine to the sea because we were taught that the first belongs to gods, the second to guests, the third to grief, and only the fourth to ourselves. Most nights she stops at the second. In her room there is a lamp that never goes out. I keep the flame steady with the small wind of my attention. When she sleeps with her hands open, as if ready to receive news kindly. I place dreams in them. Fig gardens after rain, ships arriving without storm, a child whose laughter is a bridge. She wakes and does not remember the dreams, only the ease they left behind. This is the work of the dead, who still love. Seasons turn like the pages of a book read by tides. Carthage fattens, argues, sings. I watch treaties ink themselves into habit. I watch the markets learn the arithmetic of trust. I watch children grow into the names of streets. Between temple smoke and ship bell, between die and dawn, there is a music that belongs to no god and all of them. I add my breath to it. But the world is not satisfied with one brilliance. It must set another against it to learn proportion. From across the sea, a city rises with the anger of iron. They call themselves sons of a man I knew in rain. Their roads harden, their eagles learn to stare without blinking. They practice empire as if it were a prayer to be repeated until the mouth forgets its meaning and keeps only its discipline. Rome. News travels on the backs of gulls and the fronts of ships. I hear of oaths sworn by boys who taste salt and call it vengeance. I hear my name spoken in forums where voices wear togas. Their mouths say Dido as if it were a nail in wood, as if a woman could be hammered into history and then hung with banners to justify storms. Some call me sorceress, some saint, some lesson for lovers who mistake welcome for destiny. I am none and all. I am the harbor they could not stay in because their goods preferred difficult shores. War comes like weather that forgot how to be gentle. I do not count battles. I count mothers leaning over sleeping sons who dream of elephants and rivers. I count men who whisper to their spears as if the metal could be persuaded toward mercy. I count fires and the courage it takes to carry water through a city that is learning ash. Smoke rises, black and articulate, and I write my name in it so the memory will not lose the address of grief. They say Punic when they mean a memory with teeth. They say Hannibal when they mean a vow taught to a child and fed on the milk of oath. I watch a boy cross mountains with animals whose shadows look like myths. I warm the snow around his men by nudging the wind toward kindness. I cannot end wars, but I can make small mercies travel faster. Carthage, my bright, stubborn daughter, fights like a city that knows the price of breath. Streets become strategies, thresholds become frontiers. When the end comes, it is not a single end. It is a long farewell in brick and wheat, in song and salt. Ash falls, ash finds water. Water learns green again. Even ruin, given time, is a kind of gardener. Centuries shift. Words change mouths. I become story, then rumor, then scholarship, then story again. Poets find me. One, a patient Roman with eyes the color of olive pits, takes my name into his careful hands. Virgil. He writes a book where a man I once loved must walk through a darkness shaped like truth. In that underworld, soft with shades and the rustle of what cannot be undone. Aeneas sees me. He reaches with the ache of a life still paying its debts. He asks forgiveness in a language carved by duty. I do not speak, I do not curse. I look past him toward the fields where quiet souls continue what they were good at in life. The weaver weaving, the farmer guiding sweet ghost oxen through unresistant loam, the mother counting a child who cannot be lost again. I join them. To live forever is to choose which silence to keep. He watches me go as if losing is a second art he must learn to master. That is how the poet writes it, and I allow it. Because in his telling, I am not small. I am an altar where grief puts down its sword and studies light. Other tongues lift me. In marketplaces, old men sit on upturned baskets and tell my ox-hide trick to boys who grin and imagine hilltops shrinking under the arithmetic of a queen. In libraries cool as wells, women trace my name with fingers inked in midnight. Dido, Elissa. And the letters look like small boats returning to a harbor no map admits. A scholar under cypress debates whether I was ever born or only made of needs. Another, with chalk on his sleeve, insists that even if I was fiction, I did the work of fact. I built a city. I bent an empire's memory. I taught the sea how to say stay. Sailors swear by me without knowing it. When the wind falters, they make a small space on the deck and lay there a cup of wine. They do not speak my name. Custom forbids. But they push the cup toward the bow so the ship will drink first. I take only the scent. The wine remains theirs. In return, I persuade the next wave to lift them more kindly. We have these bargains, the living and the dead. Sometimes, at the edge of Africa, where the light has the color of bronze warmed in a friendly hand, children play a game of harbors. They draw circles in sand and argue whose curve can hold the most imaginary ships. When a girl with bright hair wins by slicing her circle into ribbons and tying them end to end, the others shout, "Dido!" Though they are too young to know what they have said, I bless them with the long patience of cities. There are nights when scholars dream of me in languages they do not speak awake. I come to them wearing salt and sleep. I say, ask history to be tender to women who built with breath. They wake and write long footnotes and forget why they feel consoled. Consolation is the currency of ghosts. Aeneas. There is no kindness in pretending I have forgotten that name. In the place beyond time, where everything is the present tense of being noticed, I sometimes feel a wind like the one that took him. It moves through me without harm. If love is anything immortal, it is the refusal to turn hurt into instruction. I do not advise against men who listen to gods. I do not advise for them either. I tell the sea, be a better teacher. I tell the shore, practice forgiveness without erasing yourself. Between them, ships survive. Rome thrives. It learns law the way children learn lullabies. By repetition, then by affection, then by belief. It builds roads that instruct distance to behave. It eats and is eaten by the centuries. When its poets say my name with pity, I accept the pity and turn it into wind that helps widows grind wheat more easily in the morning. When its generals say my name with triumph, I scatter their triumph across fields so the poor can find enough pride to keep breathing. It is possible to be generous to those who set you on fire. The trick is to remain yourself while doing it. Ash makes soil honest. In the ruins of Carthage, grass learns the old corridors. Fig roots find the rooms where my counselors argued and laugh quietly as they pry apart stone. Tourists will come someday with sandals soft as questions. They will touch a broken capital and say, "Here." They will be right, though not in the way they mean. Here is everywhere I loved hard enough to leave a temperature. I keep company with memory's other queens. Zenobia rides through my dawn sometimes, her horse's breath making little theaters in the cool. She speaks of deserts as if they were libraries with too much sky between the shelves. We do not compare wounds. We compare cities. How they rise, how they refuse, how they learn to exhale after being praised. We agree that history is an ocean that pretends to be a chronicle. We agree that what saves a people is often the small, repetitive kindness of women whose names are recorded nowhere. The hand on a brow, the extra ladle of soup, the lamp kept burning for the late returning. If you ask what I am now, I will say, I am the hush between thunder and the sentence it apologizes for. I am the salt the wind carries inland so that wheat will remember who feeds it. I am the ghost of a harbor teaching other harbors to be patient with storms. I am the warmth in the air on the hill where fire learned its last beautiful word. Once each year, time still has habits even where I am. The sea under the old promontory glows faintly violet without a moon. Fishermen see it and nod, as if a daughter had passed by in a familiar dress. They do not fear. They set their nets and sing low. The catch is good the next morning, and no one remarks upon the coincidence, because gratitude is better when it does not need proof. And you who listen, you who have followed my voice across water and ink, I am yours too now. When your night is wide and your breath shallow, come to the thought of me. Find the sound of a slow wave in your chest. Imagine a city lighting its lamps one by one, not because night is dangerous, but because it is beloved. Imagine a woman on a balcony, unafraid to love what will leave her, loving it anyway, until the leaving has to learn manners. If you can imagine that, you can sleep. If you can sleepy, you can build. If you can build, then even the gods, with all their jealous weather, will have to admit you have done something worthy of the sea. I am Dido. I am the violet that refuses despair, the salt that keeps sweetness honest. I am the ember that does not scorch, the harbor that keeps its mouth open even when the tide is full of rumors. I am the name that learned to be larger than one throat. When you wake, carry me like a small, warm coin in your palm. Spend me on kindness. I multiply best that way. And when the day is finished, lay me again beside your pillow. I will hold the edge of your sleep to the edge of the sea and stitch them with a thread that cannot be broken. Not by knives, not by gods, not even by time pretending to be lost. Rest, the water remembers. I am in its remembering. And now, so are you. And now the sea is calm again. The fires have turned to stars, and Dido's voice drifts somewhere between them. Not gone, only changed. Her city still breathes beneath the sands. Her name still moves through the tide, and her courage still whispers in every wind that touches the Mediterranean. If you are still awake, stay here a moment longer. Breathe with the waves. Remember that every ending is also a harbor, and every harbor is a beginning disguised as rest. Thank you for listening, for sailing with me across time. Sleep well, dream gently, and when you wake, may you carry a little of Dido's light within you.